Before a Game of Thrones, before Narnia, before Harry Potter, before The Lord of the Rings, before the slew of classic fantasy films of the 80s, before Jason and the Argonauts, before the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, before The Thief of Baghdad, before The Wizard of Oz, and even before The Adventures of Prince Ahmed, there were a duo of films that not only took the genre of fantasy to greater heights than ever before, but also pioneered a lot of the story elements seen in modern cinematic fantasy. A series of films that could rightfully be called the first epic fantasy franchise of cinema, and one of the greatest films of the silent era. Two films that should still be considered among the greats of fantasy, not just due to their achievements, but their lasting quality. I am talking about the German duology Die Nibelungen, directed by Fritz, the man responsible for much of the iconography of the silent era, and one of the few people who could get away with unironically wearing a monocle. He had been a rising star within the German film industry thanks to his two prior films Der Müde Tod and the first Dr. Mabuse films, Dr. Mabuse the Gambler, though still some years away from two of his most acclaimed works, Metropolis and M. It was a project he started, both to celebrate his newly acquired German citizenship, he was originally Austrian, and to raise the pride of his new homeland in a time of economic hardship, which had hit the German film industry as well, decreasing productions and making them less competitive with US studios. Die Nibelungen was a good choice for that purpose, as it was a popular myth which had been adapted many times before, most notably the 13th century poem Nibelungenlied, which became the basis of the film, and Richard Wagner's opera Der Ring des Nibelungen, and a play by Friedrich Hebbel, both of which influenced the production. Oh, spoilers by the way for a film series that is more than 100 years old for anyone who cares. Die Nibelungen tells the story of Siegfried, the son of a king and a man so down bad that upon hearing of the Princess of Burgundy, Kriemhild, he sets upon a journey to marry her, only to be given the wrong directions that led him towards a dragon. And instead of just turning around, because there's no way that thing is chasing after him, he immediately attacks, kills and then bathes in the thing's blood, which grants him invincibility, save for a single spot on his back where a leaf clung to him. It is when he arrives in the City of Worms that the true intrigue of the story begins, as Siegfried becomes embroiled in a complex web of schemes and lies in order to marry the woman he loves. First by helping the feeble King Gunther, Kriemhild's brother, win the hand of Brunhild, a woman warrior who will only marry a man stronger than her, and she is already stronger than most men, and is sure to be able to turn King Gunther into a pretzel, though given how obsessed he is with her, maybe is into that kind of thing, much to his own peril. So, using a cloak that turns him invisible, Siegfried helps Gunther beat Brunhild's challenges. It is here where it is quite clear that we are not watching a story of a righteous hero, as Siegfried, although he looks the part, has no qualms about what he is doing, which is not only immoral from the standpoint of you are tricking this woman into marrying someone under false pretenses, but also in the sense that this is deeply humiliating for Brunhild, as he takes great pride in her prowess, as well she should, since the only man who managed to beat her was juiced up on dragon blood. And this humiliation is only compounded when she starts suspecting this ruse, as well, looking at King Gunther, one does not get the impression of great physical strength. But it gets worse from there, as Brunhild continues to refuse King Gunther, which leads Hagen, his advisor and the series' true main villain, to extend their deal with Siegfried, who now has to disguise himself as the king and overpower Brunhild in a scene which is suggestive of certain things that I am not allowed to talk about on YouTube. It is this conflict which is the most interesting part of the whole film, Siegfried's love for Kriemhild leading him to perform even more heinous and dishonorable acts. King Gunther, a weak man in a world that values strength, pining away for a woman he admires but can never win over due to his inadequacies, who acquiesces to his advisor's plan out of desperation despite his discomfort. Hagen, an overzealous servant of his king who will stop at nothing to do his duty, and then Brunhild, a proud warrior who is dishonored and violated by all three men, who upon discovering their lies sets about the downfall of Siegfried by exploiting the king's feelings for her and Hagen's loyalty to have him kill the man she blames for her humiliation. Though out of all of them it is Hagen who is the most interesting. He may at first seem like a one-note villain, but behind his hostile exterior is a man who is so loyal that he would do anything to please his sovereign. The problem is, his actions lead to further troubles, as his plan to win over Brunhild for Gunther ends up in inevitable failure. But instead of recognizing his own blame, he puts all of it on Siegfried, and in one final bit of trickery, convinces Kriemhild to tell him where her husband's weak spot is, so he can kill him for his king, after which Brunhild takes her own life, making the whole ordeal useless in the end. That said, despite some praise that I have allotted here, the film's story does have its fair share of weaknesses, chief among them being its main character. Siegfried is rather bland, and his motivation of wanting to marry a woman after hearing about her for the first time does little to help, his blandness diminishing some of the film's dramatic impact. Though besides that, Die Nibelungen does offer up a lot more with its visuals, a not too surprising fact, as this is a film by the same director as Metropolis, one of the most beautiful additions to the cinematic canon, which Fritz would direct a few years afterwards. Even though many of the frames have received their fair share of wear and tear over the full century of the film's existence, some of which are far beyond the skills of restorers to heal, most of the film still looks fantastic thanks to strong art design and expert framing. Some of my favorite shots are of Siegfried riding through the forest, an image that looks pulled right out of myth itself, or the epic establishing shots of castles, especially Brunhild's abode, which stands atop a tall mountain that is surrounded by fire, the sun behind casting a vast halo around the entire scene, all of it looking like the cover of a metal album. And the castle interiors are fantastic as well, minimalist in design, with some of the walls being decorated with simple yet striking geometric shapes which evoke the styles of the ancient past. Much of the film's visuals were also inspired by German artists, such as Caspar David Friedrich and Franz von Stuck. It was a film made through excruciating attention to detail, with every decision regarding set design and actor movements being made after thorough analysis and consensus among the principal crew members, only for Lang to change his mind and start the whole process again, extending post-production to 3 months before filming could even begin. After that, the real challenge of principal photography would begin, a 9-month ordeal during which the flailing economy put much strain on the production, so much so that they had to buy materials for set building from the black market, and at one point resort to hiring elderly retirees to pick up nails from older sets, and just to add to the strain was Lang himself, who demanded long, breakless working days that were stretched to 14 hours. His perfectionism was so excessive that Lang kept on editing the film even while it was premiering, pausing the showing until he could finish the next reel, during which the audience was forced to wait. Though despite this excruciating effort, there are a fair bit of lackluster visuals strewn about, especially when it comes to the special effects, which, as one might suspect, have aged like milk. A good example being the dragon animatronic, a feat of complex engineering which took 10 people inside and even more underneath to puppeteer and weeks to practice, only for it to lose all of its luster and suggested terror, the thing looking more like a ramshackle attraction of some cheap theme park due to its obvious lack of motion and slowness, and the dim-witted look on its face. That said, I feel that pointing out the visual shortcomings of a film that came out more than a century ago is silly, as of course some parts of it have not aged well, but also because the flaws and deterioration of silent era films are now part of their aesthetic appeal, as modern audiences are not watching them unless they are major film history buffs, or if they like the retro look of older films. So even though I may not feel the excitement that was probably intended for the dragon fight, I can still enjoy it for the obvious effort that went into making it, and because it looks almost cute in retrospect due to the serious tone that is intended, which contrasts violently with how silly it all seems. Even the scratches and other forms of damage have now become a part of the film's aesthetic as well, and I would feel like something was missing were they removed entirely. So all in all, Die Nibelungen is a fine film with some great silent era visuals, an alright story which is kind of held back by a weak main character. And were that where it ended, this film would not really warrant me making this video, but Die Nibelungen Siegfried is only one half of a greater whole, and in my opinion, just the build-up to a much greater film, its second part and superior follow-up, Die Nibelungen Kriemhild's Revenge. There we see the freshly widowed Kriemhild swear vengeance against Hagen and sets in motion a plan to enact her revenge. Here the main weakness of the first film is ameliorated, as Kriemhild takes her seat as the film's protagonist, and is in every way a much more engaging character than her husband, with simple but strong motivations, and as I will get into later, a much more of a villainous quality. This is a massive improvement from her characterization in the first film, where she acts more as a prop and has little to no personality, whereas in the second one she is like vengeance personified, always maintaining her steely glare, as if every waking moment is dedicated to nothing but thoughts of killing her husband's murderer. And much of this is thanks to actress Margareta Schön, who endows Kriemhild with an air of indomitable resolve and ever-spiraling madness, using her penetrating eyes to great effect. To enact her revenge, Kriemhild marries none other than Attila the Hun, all to win his allegiance by bearing him a son, so that she can use him and his forces for her bloody purpose. and it is here where we have to discuss one aspect that has maybe not aged that well, which is the portrayal of the Huns, which is kind of yikesy. I get that the filmmakers wanted to make them appear more savage to contrast with the Burgundians, though the fact that they look almost like orcs is reason enough to believe that they may have gone overboard, and may be a sign of some racial animus. That said, the Huns, and Attila in particular, do end up being more sympathetic than most of the cast. They are sure to have done their fair share of evil deeds, but what we see of them in the film portrays them as intimidating at first, but eventually amiable, especially Attila, whose demeanor takes a drastic change after the birth of his son, who he dotes on. There is just something so endearing about this imposing conqueror turning into the most loving father. There is also the fact that he is one of the more honorable characters in the film, as although he is willing to aid his wife in some ways, like inviting the target of her revenge and Kriemhild's brothers to his home per her request, he is unwilling to violate any customs of guests' right by having Hagen Tronje killed beneath his roof. Here the film gets dark, as pesky little things like honor and guests' right and her husband's disapproval are not going to stop Kriemhild at this point. So she bribes Attila's soldiers with a promise of his shield full of gold in exchange for Hagen's head, a plot that gets exposed and thwarted at the last moment, as one Burgundian soldier manages to warn his countrymen before getting killed, after which Hagen slays Kriemhild and Attila's child right before their eyes, before he, the king and his brothers and all their soldiers barricade themselves in Attila's palace. What commences is an escalating tragedy, as Kriemhild's need for revenge leads to more casualties than just Hagen, the man's soldiers and king vowing all to fight to the last, despite his desire to give his own life for theirs. This just comes to show what kind of man Hagen is, blindly loyal, but also one which bought the allegiance of all the men who are willing to die for his sake, showing an almost heroic aspect to the man, best displayed in this scene where in a helpless situation, even as it is clear that they will all die, he still tries to defend his king from falling rubble. Though what's ironic about the whole affair is the fact that his loyalty led to the demise of not just his king, but the king's brothers as well, as had he not suggested that Siegfried would gain Kriemhild's hand by helping Gunther win over Brunhild, then Brunhild would not have seen through the plot and demanded Siegfried's demise. And had Hagen not killed Siegfried, then they would not be trapped within an enemy palace, which Kriemhild orders burned to hasten their death. And just to top all of this off, it is Hagen, out of all others, who survives, Kriemhild's three brothers, two of them innocent of all wrongdoing, dying first. This is the film's most impressive and elaborate setup, filmed at an old factory site which was renovated for the set, which would then be exploded and burnt in view of 16 cameras to get as much coverage of the conflagration as possible, Lang contributing by setting off the final explosion, shooting an arrow tipped with magnesium powder into the fires. This sequence also encapsulates the film's major themes, not just the folly of blind loyalty, but also the destructiveness and unintended casualties of revenge, as in the process of seeking justice for her husband's death, Kriemhild causes the demise of people who, for all we know, were innocent, her brothers among them, and even her own child. But even after all of this, Kriemhild, perhaps due to madness, is unrepentant, and stares on, regarding the slaughter with the same steely resolve as before, saying to Attila that she has never felt more love than now, her character development ending with her as a greater monster than the man she intended to kill. The film received little love nor enjoyed much popularity in its home country, many critics disliking its portrayal of the classic characters, and the first part was criticized for its excessive length, though among its few admirers were none other than Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels, who counted it as among their favorites. Goebbels in fact singled out Die Nibelungen as an exemplary piece of cinema, which other directors should aspire to. So great was its esteem among the Nazis that, according to film theorist Siegfried Kracauer and his most notable book, From Caligari to Hitler, A Psychological History of the German Film, Die Nibelungen was a major influence on the most notable Nazi propaganda film, Triumph of the Will, seen in how both films reduce people to ornaments. And in the documentary that accompanies both films on my Blu-ray copy, Das Erbe der Nibelungen by Guido Altendorf and Anke Wilkening, it is shown how the film's imagery, especially the shot of Siegfried forging his sword, was used as inspiration for and outright plagiarized by Nazi propaganda. This adoration by the Nazis may seem obvious at first, due to their fetishization of Germanic myths and Siegfried's portrayal as a strong, blonde, heroic figure, but on closer inspection, the Nibelungen has little connection to their ideology and could even be interpreted as being about the exact opposite of what the Nazis believed. Lang himself is unlikely to have been a follower of such an ideology, being half Jewish on his mother's side. Furthermore, Lang did flee from Germany after the Nazis took power, despite the fact that he could have enjoyed a fruitful career making films with direct state funding, as the Führer wanted the director to head an agency which supervised Iraq's film productions, saying that Lang was someone who would give them great Nazi films. There is the issue of his then wife, Thea von Harper though, who was also the screenwriter of his most notable films, including Die Nibelungen, and if any unconscious or intended Nazism is to be found in the films, it is likely to have come from her, as she was a frequent collaborator of the Nazi Party, continuing to work on films for them, including 26 he had writing credits for, and a plethora of others she assisted with without credit, Goebbels himself holding her in high esteem. That said, she did describe the film's themes herself as showing the inexorability with which the first guilt entails the last atonement, and I could find little to indicate that she was a follower of their ideology during the production of Die Nibelungen. Overall, a close reading of the films shows little that denotes any allegiance to Nazism, and even some Nazis agreed, as the second part was made unavailable in Germany due to it not conforming to their ideology, which makes sense as many of the German characters are depicted as violent and treacherous, especially Hagen Tronje, who Kracauer likened to a well-known type of Nazi leader, whose actions and excessive need to serve his king leads his sovereign and his entire line to damnation, which serves almost as a sort of unintentional foreshadowing for what befell the Third Reich, and brings the film's themes full circle by showing the destruction that Hagen's deeds and fanaticism wrought. I would like to close off with Lang's own words about why he made the movies, as his motivations to do so were to uplift Germany after the turmoil of World War I and the economic hardships that followed. As he said, "To counteract the pessimistic spirit of the time, I wanted to film the great legend of Siegfried so that Germany could draw inspiration from her epic past." Even though a century has passed since its release, the Die Nibelungen duology is still something people should watch till this day, as although it has not aged well in certain regard, and it can be slow in places, not helped by its 4.5-hour runtime, the two films still have a lot to offer, be it gorgeous retro visuals, complex and interesting characters, and one hell of a climax that still enthralls to this day, all of which is elevated by the epic score of composer Gottfried Huberts. For some, the prospect of watching a silent era film is unappealing due to how much the art and technology of filmmaking has advanced, but for enthusiasts of film history and old movies, both parts of the Nibelungen are a must-watch and a cornerstone of the cinematic fantasy genre. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please consider to like, subscribe and ring the notification bell for more content like this.